Modern academics often treat religious belief and scientific rationality as competing forces, mutually exclusive systems that cannot occupy the same mind. This view requires an individual to make a choice, either use symbolic narratives to explain why the universe exists, or use empirical observation to explain exactly how it operates. Yet the historical record challenges this divide. Many foundational scientists operated comfortably in both domains, producing rigorous observational data alongside deep theological commitments. This perceived conflict rests on an assumption that the brain organizes all information into a single flat belief system. Religion and science function as distinct modes of cognitive organization, each operating on a separate frequency of the human experience. Sheikh Bahai, a central figure in Safavid Iran, embodied the integration of religious orthodoxy and empirical science. His theological work was extensive, encompassing canonical Shia legal scholarship, Quranic interpretation, and highly symbolic mystical poetry. Simultaneously, he produced complex mathematical astronomy. When mapping celestial spheres, he utilized calculation and geometry rather than relying on theological authority for natural observations. He applied this same empirical rigor to hydraulic engineering, designing subterranean aqueducts governed by fluid mechanics. This raises a specific question of cognitive mechanics. How does one mind generate symbolic religious outputs and predictive engineering models without suffering internal dissonance? His achievements suggest his mind layered knowledge into a single, integrated architecture. Continuity theory suggests that human reasoning evolves through layered emergence. The mind builds upon older modes of thought rather than replacing them. We can map this foundational stack. It begins with raw sensory experience, forming into symbols, organizing into myth, and stabilizing as religion. Higher order layers emerge directly on top. Philosophy introduces conceptual analysis. Logic adds mechanism. Mathematics creates abstraction rules, leading to science and technology. As a new layer appears, the previous layer remains active as the structural substrate for the thoughts happening above it. This nesting principle challenges the idea that empirical science is meant to overwrite symbolic myth. These systems operate on separate vertical levels. Myth and religion stabilize global existential meaning, while science and engineering reorganize local physical reality. The Brain Kinematics Model explains how the mind navigates this stack by shifting between different organizational attractors, distinct operational modes used to solve specific problems. Ethical dilemmas or existential questions prompt the brain to shift into a symbolic coherence attractor, using the language of religion and philosophy. On the other hand, physical and mechanical problems trigger an immediate shift into a causal modeling attractor, utilizing strict geometry and complex mathematics. These attractors are triggered selectively, governed by the context of the immediate task. In the BKM framework, friction occurs when the rules of one attractor, like the symbolic logic of myth, are misapplied to mechanical requirements of physical systems. The principle of organizational distribution explains the variance in how different minds process the same data. This chart maps the cognitive stack along the x-axis. While universal to all humans, the y-axis tracks resource allocation for each layer. This individualized distribution often presents as a left-skewed profile, showing cognitive resources heavily concentrated in symbolic and religious layers. This distribution leads to a focus on fruition, stability, and preservation. Because the individual optimizes knowledge within this specific attractor, they achieve depth in theology or literature, while the transition to mathematical abstraction proceeds slowly. A right-skewed profile shifts energy toward the right side of the axis, favoring mathematical and empirical abstraction. This distribution supports rapid conceptual innovation and the construction of theories. These individuals often bypass intermediate symbolic stages because their logical and empirical layers are more strongly interconnected. This explains why two people receiving the exact same education produce different outputs. One mind consolidates a text into theology, another into mathematics. The specific layer in which the brain naturally consolidates information dictates how that knowledge will ultimately be used. Sheikh Bahai possessed a rare cognitive distribution, a broad, multimodal curve with high resource density across symbolic, logical, and empirical layers simultaneously. This distribution allowed for seamless organizational continuity, supporting transitions between prayer, abstraction, and engineering. This manifested in his architecture, which integrated precise geometric planning into the symbolic requirements of a religious space. Each distinct cognitive layer remained highly active and accessible, independently contributing to fundamentally different problems, exactly as the complex situation required. Historical polymaths are distinguished by this broad organizational distribution, which supports fluid transitions across the entire cognitive hierarchy. A final variable in this distribution function is time. Weighting functions are dynamic. Life experiences, cultural contexts, and professional practice continually reshape this curve. An engineer's profile may widen to strengthen symbolic cognition, or a scholar's curve may shift toward empirical observation over the course of decades. Intellectual development involves the constant redistribution of regulatory strain over the course of a lifetime. This individualized trajectory explains why the emergence of higher-order thought varies in speed and focus for every person. Deep religious commitment and scientific creativity represent integrated cognitive states. Historical conflicts between these domains often reflect differences in how institutions distribute resources, rather than a fundamental flaw in human reasoning. Complex intellectual systems emerge when an individual maintains strong connections across every layer of the cognitive stack. Older layers remain vital to human meaning, even as new scientific layers emerge. Architecture, where the emergence of new layers relies on the continued activity of the old.